Hey LifePoint family and friends, I want to bring you a quick lesson. I know I've been teaching about hope for the last couple weeks, and I want to talk to you about faith. I titled this lesson, Hope is the Soil That Faith Grows In. And I'm sure most of you at some point in time have said, I hope I don't get sick, or I hope this works out for me, right? And so we use that word hope, and we kind of get it confused with wish. So really what we're doing is we're putting hope in place of wish. And wishing is wanting something that's not easily attainable, right? And so, for example, you may say, oh, I wish, or I hope, right? I wish I could take that trip to Europe, right? It's something that you know that's eventually maybe you may be able to get there, maybe something to do, but it's something that's not attainable, it's not tangible at that moment, but you're thinking about being able to do that. And so when we use those terms interchangeably, right, and so it's easy for us to go back between hope and wish, and we kind of use them all the time. But hope should not be connected to the common concept of wish. See, hope is not a long shot, or the idea that something might good happen to you if we get lucky. And sometimes that's how we use it, right? It's like, oh, if I'm lucky, I hope this happens because it's just going to work out in my benefit. And we start to speak like that. But hope's the opposite of that. Hope actually means the joyful anticipation of good. It's living with expectation of something good happening, right? And believing that it's going to come to you when you need it. So think about when you were a kid, right? Or think about your children, or even when you were a kid, when Christmas time came around and you were expecting a gift from your family or parents, or maybe for your kids, you had gifts that were specifically picked out for them, and you could see the excitement in their face. You knew that they didn't know what the gift was, but they were excited. They were expecting to get something good, right? And as adults, we do that as well, right? Maybe it's your birthday or something, and you're expecting a gift from maybe your loved one or your children, or maybe your spouse, and you don't know what it is. You've given them some ideas, but you just see a box and you're expecting it for it to be something good. And so that's how hope is, right? It's living with expectation. You have that excitement, even though you don't know what it is. So Proverbs chapter 23, verse 17 and 19 says, "Don't envy sinners, but always continue to fear the Lord. You will be rewarded for this. Your hope will not be disappointed. My child, listen and be wise. Keep your heart on the right course." You see, hope is living with that expectation and not living with disappointment. Now, we were born and designed to live with great hope. That's the way God created us. God expected us to live a life of hope, a life of expectation. It doesn't mean you're never going to have disappointments or problems or difficulties in your life, right? That's just life in general. But just because you have hope doesn't mean you're ever going to deal with those things. We're human. But we still have to learn how to deal with those disappointments in our life. And we're all going to deal with it. It's all going to affect every one of us in our lives, right? We are going to face disappointment regardless of how you're doing in your walk with Christ. See, but hope is greater. See, hope is that soil that faith grows in. And what I mean by that is faith takes aim at very specific situations in your life, but hope is more general, right? Hope is the overall confidence in God's desire, commitment, and the ability to make things for your good, right? So when you're thinking about faith, when you have faith, you're speaking about a very specific situation in your life. So maybe you're praying over maybe a new job, or maybe someone in your family's sick. So you're being very specific, and you're using your faith to pray about that. But hope is different, right? Hope is very general. Hope is just living a life of, not regardless of the situation, just living a life of expectation, right? We don't know what's going to happen day to day in our lives, but we don't go into our life being scared of everything, right? You don't go outside saying, oh, I don't want to go outside because something could happen to me. I can trip and hit my head, right? We live in a life of expectation, saying, I'm gonna go outside. Today's gonna be a great day. Whatever comes my way, it's just gonna be God opening doors for me, right? So there's a different difference. But in order to have great hope, in order to have great faith, you have to have great hope, right? It starts from hope. It starts by living a life of expectation, expecting something good from God. So when you live a life of expectation that something good is always going to happen in your life, you begin to speak out those things into your life, right? You begin to speak into the situations that maybe you're dealing with in your life, and you start to exercise your faith. So hope allows you to believe that good things are going to happen. And when maybe something doesn't go the way you want it to, you start to speak out and say, you know what, God, it may not be the situation that I'm intended, the situation I thought I was going to be in, but I know you're going to make a better situation for me. You're going to make a better way for me. And that's when you start to use your faith. You start to exercise your faith with hope building around it. So you may not even see the outcome yet, right? You may not even know what's going to happen, but because of hope and expectation, you begin to believe it before it ever happens, all right? And that's what hope's about. Not understanding what the situation is, or maybe you understand a piece of the situation, but you don't understand what the outcome's going to be. But yet you start to believe that, you know what, whatever the outcome is, God's always taking care of it. God's always in control. And that's how faith grows. When you start to believe and you start to speak over situations in your life, you start to exercise your faith and start to build up your faith. And when you see and experience what you've been praying about, right? And maybe what you've been expecting, you start to have more faith and you start to live your life with bigger expectations. So you start to step out even more, right? The Bible talks about that. God says every individual has a measure of faith, right? Every person has a measure of faith. We all have faith. God's put it in us. But the ones who have bigger faith is because they believe without seeing what's going to happen. And when those situations start to work out for the benefit, they start to build up their faith. They start to expect more. So they start to speak over bigger situations in their life. And when they start to see that happen, they start to build up their faith again. Doesn't mean that throughout that time disappointment or situations come about and kind of stop and put a roadblock, but they know that, hey, you know what? This is happening for a reason. This has happened because maybe God's trying to protect me for something, and not being down about it. And so it's always living a life of expectation that God's going to do something good in your life. 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 12, and I'm reading this out of the Amplified version because I like what it says here. It says, since we have such a glorious hope and confident expectation, we speak with great courage. You see what hope does? It gives you confidence. When you hope for something, it's giving you confidence and you're expecting something great to happen. And when you're expecting something great to happen, you start to change your attitude. You start to change your mindset. You start to change the way you speak about the situation. No longer are you doubting the situation or speaking against it, but now you're speaking against it, saying that God's going to overcome. The situation I may be in, this is not what I expected, but you know what? God has something better for me. So your outlook, your what you start to look at starts to change. So now we start to speak over our situations differently, right? Things that are happening in our life where previously we wouldn't. Maybe we would speak down against it. Maybe we would say, God, why is this happening? But now we come expecting something different and we come believing. So the more that we come expecting with greater hope and confidence and speaking over our life and maybe the lives of others, we begin to take bigger leaps of faith. And faith is the key, right? That's the key. Faith is the key to pleasing God. In Hebrews chapter 11:6, it says, it is impossible to please God without faith. So we need faith in order to please God. Anyone who wants to come to him must believe that God exists and that he rewards those who sincerely seek him. So faith is the key, but faith is built up coming from our hope. And that's where we talk about that hope is the soil that grows faith, because the more you believe, the more you start to build up your faith. So whatever your situation may be right now, whatever you're going through, I don't know what it is, but let's start to think differently. Let's start to believe that God's going to work in your situation. You may not see the outcome. You may not know what's going to happen, but God already has a plan. God's already making a change before you can even see it. Now he's just expecting you to believe and step out in faith and have the same belief that he's going to do something in your life. So when you start to do that, God begins to move in our behalf because you start to believe something you can't even see it. And that's how God moves. That's how God works. God works in our faith. So I wanted to just say thank you for joining us today, and hopefully I gave you a little bit of words of encouragement about having hope, especially in the situation or the times we're in, and knowing that God has everything in their control and God's going to take care of your life. Thank you, and God bless you.